Much in the news these days is a fellow by the name of Elon Musk. And he has now apparently purchased Twitter in its entirety. Has to be approved by the mucky mucks in Washington and all of that. What's going to happen? How is it going to change the world? Will it?
Well, I think Twitter has already changed the world. What I'll share with you next is really my opinion, which is Twitter for me and most of the people I think in my generation, I'm Gen X, so we were one of the first users of Twitter, has always been about news. So it will be really interesting to see if they take the pivot towards becoming more of a news outlet, right? You hear about it on Twitter before you see it on TV these days. And sometimes Twitter is considered to be a more truthful representation of news as a result of it being reported by actual individuals and not news organizations that may lean in today's society to the right or to the left with very little in the middle. And that'll be really interesting to see.
That's an interesting comment from the journalistic side. We look at it and we say, well, yeah, I understand what you said, but also it's all unverified. It all hasn't gone through the professional standards of journalism, even though journalism is suspect today, the way you described it on the national level, particularly. I mean, there's a lot to be careful for when you're on Twitter. I mean, you really do have to take it with a grain of salt to a degree, don't you?
Well, back to the use of data, I think the question will be, how will Elon rewrite the algorithms to analyze the data being put in by users, and then what actions will be automated or taken by an adjudicating board once the data tells them that somebody is leading misinformation out on the internet, or somebody is promoting hate crimes, or somebody is disseminating things that may lead to public violence. And then what do they do? That will be the question. And will Elon institutionalize journalistic integrity into the algorithms that analyze the data put in by users in order to give the brand trust? Because that's all that we really want, right? If we trust Twitter, it won't matter. We'll trust what comes out of it because we trust the brand, not the individual users.
And so he's spending $46 billion, whatever the number is, to get Twitter. I understand how Amazon, how Google monetize data. How does Twitter earn its money?
Well, they haven't done as good of a job at it as Facebook and Google. That's clear. And that's been the critique, I think, of the organization since the beginning, is that they're not as invested in the advertisement, marketing, revenue generating machine that Facebook and Google have built that is the bulk of their revenue. We'll see if that changes. I think there's a lot of speculation that it will, and that Twitter will actually become a lot more like Facebook and like Google. And you'll see more advertisements that are targeted based on the analyzation of your data. So prepare for that. It's a very likely outcome. But the opposite outcome is also likely true, because he's going to privatize the company, which means unlike Facebook and Google, Twitter won't be under the kind of SEC scrutiny that the other competitors for ad tech are, and that could dramatically change what they're able to do with that data.
Well, it really is going to be interesting to see how he transforms the platform. I mean, it's you mentioned the Wild West earlier. He's the new marshal in town.
Well, look, the whole point of going public is to give transparency to consumers and investors. And when a company goes private, they are not required to be as transparent as a public company. But transparency, as I said before, is a cornerstone of data privacy and good data privacy that leads to customer retention and acquisition. So will Elon choose to bake an even higher ethical bar of privacy and higher ethical bar of transparency into Twitter that instead says, hey, we're not public, so we're not going to hold the bottom line of what is required from us. We're going to set a new standard. We're going to set a higher ethical bar on how data should be used and watch all the public companies follow us. That would be really amazing.